So it's been at least 100 years that both Warner Brothers and Walt Disney have been in business making movies, television, comic books, and cartoons. Stuff that people really, really like. But as of the modern era, both Disney and Warner Brothers have completely fallen off the map, in my opinion. Both companies have yet to produce anything of true merit that's lasting. Both companies are making the same mistakes over and over again. And both companies really don't know what to do as far as the future is concerned. They're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. I have a good history with both companies. I grew up with both companies, mostly on the animation side for Warner Brothers, and with Disney, a mixture of live action and animation, as I'm sure was the case with most of you. I'm 30 years old, born in 92, so from 92 till 2023, I've seen a good chunk of stuff from both studios. I think it's fair to say. However, in the modern age, I could care less for either. Both are equally crappy. Both have gone down the drain. And it's sad because there used to be a standard of quality associated with both. Whenever you saw that WB shield or that signed Disney logo, you knew you were going to get something of quality. Nowadays, I wouldn't even spit in their direction. They're caught up in this streaming war, and neither has quite figured out how to do it right. Both are very expensive models, and they're trying to implement ads, which is one of the features that separated them from cable and that drew people away from cable was the lack of ads, but they're not making as much money, so they have to make up the lost costs, and it's coming back to bite them in the butt because people end up cutting streaming. And in some cases, in rare cases, people end up going back to cable and satellite. So when reflecting on both of these companies, I think I'm going to start the first half with the good years, and then we'll get to now. So the good years, at least for me, I was born in 1992. In the 90s, both Disney and Warner Brothers were releasing a lot of stuff on VHS. We went to the theaters every once in a while when there was a nice family film that came out. Disney had a lot of stuff coming out in the 90s, The Little Mermaid, Hercules, Aladdin, The Lion King, Toy Story, stuff like that is stuff that we would have gone to the theater to see, and we would have walked away feeling good. Those are all good movies, as far as I'm concerned. I know some people like to debate about Hercules, but... And then there was, Disney cartoons, which they also released on VHS, some of the old Mickey Mouse stuff, we had VHSs of those, and then eventually those 90s animated films ended up coming on VHS, and we got those in DVD. And then there was Disney Channel. Towards the late 90s, they started really investing in that, and we watched that like crazy. And then throughout the early 2000s, it was mostly a mixture of Disney Channel and some movies that were interesting through Pixar and through their own studios until they stopped making 2D animation. And then it was just kind of like, why bother? Because everything started to look like Pixar. I don't know. Does anybody know what started this trend? If it was in response to DreamWorks' success with Shrek, or if it was just an industry standard that was on the rise? I don't know what it was, but this idea of going away from 2D animation for film is really just a mistake. I think it's a horrible mistake, and I can't understand why both Warner and Disney have dissolved their 2D animation departments for film. I don't understand it. I just don't understand it. It's absolutely crazy. There's so many movies that would appeal to me if they were 2D animated, but they just don't. And then both companies don't really seem to be family oriented. Now Warner Brothers didn't start out as a family oriented company. They just were making whatever films that they thought would be successful. They're just kind of a general entertainment company. So I don't hold being family friendly, I don't hold them to that standard. I do, however, hold Disney to that standard because that was kind of Walt's vision, and that was something that they were invested in for the duration of the company since his death. And they have subsequently turned their back on that. But we'll get into the bad half later. I want to talk about the good of Warner Brothers before we really dive into the meat and potatoes of that. The good of Warner Brothers. I think the first Warner Brothers live action film that I've seen, to my memory, was Free Willy. That was one that we had on VHS. I don't think we ever went to the theaters to see it. I remember the Michael Jackson music video they had in it. That was pretty cool. I think that was my first exposure to Michael Jackson. Um, so that was the first live action Warner Brothers film. And then subsequently, there were different things on TV that my parents watched that would have been Warner Brothers films. Most of the films that they had would have been on television or VHS. And I don't remember a whole lot of the live action ones off the top of my head. There's still plenty of classic Warner Brothers live action films that I haven't seen. I probably should go back and watch them. But where Warner Brothers resonates with me is in the animation department, specifically with Looney Tunes and with the Hanna-Barbera side of things. With Looney Tunes, I loved Looney Tunes. I absolutely adored Looney Tunes. Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, Yosemite Sam, Elmer Fudd, Roadrunner and Coyote, Sylvester and Tweety, Foghorn, Leghorn, the whole cast. Loved all of them. They were all good. Even the ones that I didn't quite care for, I still could sit down and watch for hours and hours. In fact, I'm looking to try to get some of them on Blu-ray now because they're really special and I really like them. The stuff that I really love, I go out of my way to get on Blu-ray. I got the Batman Animated Series Blu-ray, which is another Warner Brothers property that I watched growing up, was the Batman Animated Series. It was on reruns all the time. Certain times in the afternoon on Cartoon Network, it was playing for quite a while. It was a tremendous series. The art style, the tone, everything. And it was a good follow-up for the Batman '89 movie and Batman Returns. I think that that's really kind of what spawned that, and it really worked really well. So, really like that. Rest in peace, Kevin Conroy. Um, and then the Hanna-Barbera stuff was really cool. I didn't watch as much of that because they didn't show as much of that. I remember the Flintstones being on a lot whenever we had Boomerang and Jetsons sometimes. I didn't watch a whole lot of the Jetsons, but Scooby-Doo was probably the number one broadcasted Hanna-Barbera thing on Cartoon Network, and subsequently Boomerang. So it's crazy to me just how amazing and how successful Hanna-Barbera was. Hanna-Barbera was truly pioneers of the Saturday morning cartoon. They were Saturday morning cartoons for many people because they had so many shows and so many characters. Just recently, they made a show called Jellystone, which stars Yogi Bear and Boo Boo and whatever the girl bear is there. I can't remember her name. But I'll talk about that in just a minute because I've got some negatives there. Um, but yeah, Cartoon Network. I mean, gosh, going back to the early days, there was Dexter's Lab, Powerpuff Girls, Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, Samurai Jack, and then you get later into the cycle and you get Ed and Nettie, which is an all-time classic. That was probably my favorite show on the network for the longest time. Then my second favorite would have been Codename Kids Next Door. That was absolutely tremendous. And then after that was stuff like Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, Chowder, and Adventure Time. Although by this time I was pretty much in high school, so those things were, I was a little older, but I could still appreciate a lot of that. So it was still really quality animation, and it was good storytelling and just fun to watch. It was fun from start to finish, you know. And then I mean there were some other shows in between that I'm struggling to remember off the top of my head. There were some some smaller things, but I mean, it is what it is, you know? It is what it is. At the end of the day, both Warner Brothers and Disney built up such a library of TV, movies, even music. They both did music. I think there was Walt Disney Records and then Warner Music Group, which they sold off subsequently and now it's its own thing. Which I don't understand why they did that, but okay, I guess music's been a losing proposition because they can't monetize it like they used to with the internet. But they've been wildly successful. Warner Brothers a little less so. They've had to sell the company a couple of times. They've been in the red several times. They got bought out by AOL, which was a disaster, and then they became Time Warner, and then AT&T, and now Warner Discovery. So I mean, they've been passed around quite a bit because they just haven't gotten a handle on what they need to do. And that brings me to the negatives. Both of these companies are steeped in identity politics and DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and that whole push, that whole ideology. And they've been making their films, their TV shows, everything that they've been making has been focused primarily on this, and they have come out and said that that is their focus. At least Disney has. Warner hasn't made any recent statements in terms of their mission statements and goals, but Disney has come out and said, we want to make DEI focused content. And it's shot them in the foot. People now have gone from being indifferent to Disney and thinking, it's just not as good quality, to actively hating them because they're so focused on this, frankly, political ideology. And other studios have followed suit. And it's very unfortunate because, again, they've got this library that spans a century of real quality content that's some of which is somewhat controversial, but most of it is apolitical. Most of it, aside from self-contained stories within a certain time period or dealing with a certain historical event or even fictitious stuff, most of it is just apolitical. It's just time and place, and there's really not a whole lot of focus. But now it's like, oh, you have to meet every quota of DEI. You have to push stories that focus on DEI, and you have to make everybody's voices feel heard. Now, as a black man, I don't buy into the narrative that black voices have been somehow silenced by Hollywood, or hashtag Hollywood is too white. I don't buy into that. That stuff is nonsense to me. So whenever a studio comes out and says, we want to be more diverse, we want to be more inclusive, we want to be better, I don't buy into it. Because I am old enough to know that there were black sitcoms and films that were incredibly successful all throughout the late 20th century into the early 2000s. But for some reason, the DEI crowd, the woke crowd, whatever you want to call them, have decided to ignore all of that and have decided to push everything to the forefront. Disney recently rebooted The Proud Family, and from what I've heard, it's gone about as well as you'd expect. It's far more woke, it's more based on identity than the original show, and it's just garbage. And it's crazy to me to think that these companies, when they celebrate this 100th anniversary, Warner Brothers released a trailer for their 100th anniversary featuring Morgan Freeman. It was a great presentation. But the sense that I walked away from it with was they absolutely do not understand the trouble that they're in. They think that they are going to last 100 more years. They will not. Absolutely, they will not. The stuff that they showed a lot of their legacy stuff, the stuff that's worth talking about and celebrating. Then they try to show some of the new stuff that's been horribly unsuccessful and act like it is. Stuff like Batgirl and even Big Bang Theory. Whether you love or hate Big Bang Theory, I think it's built a reputation of not being great amongst a lot of people. So, I mean, it's historic in its own right, but I mean, even Batgirl is one of the most mishandled properties I think I've ever seen of any television show. It's absolutely terrible. And then they showed something for the Flash movie, which is mirrored in controversy due to Ezra Miller, and it reeks of, we don't know where we're going, but we think we're going to be a success. When in reality, no, they're probably going to fail. They're in all honesty, they're most likely going to fail. So I don't know. And I didn't see anything on Disney other than a couple of logos that they did. I didn't see any of their presentations, but I do know they're not much better. In fact, they're worse than Warner Brothers. They have made open mission statements declaring what they want to do. They have doubled down, they have tripled down, and now they're in some sort of kerfuffle with their board of directors and shuffling around CEOs and things like that. Everybody's predicting that they're going to be restructuring at some point, and that's just going to be a huge mess when they do so. And all of this is because they've been rudderless, and because of Bob Iger's horrible decision making. He overspent buying Fox. He probably overspent buying Star Wars and Marvel as well, but he doubled and tripled down on those properties, and now Disney's in the red, and they're struggling to make ends meet. The parks are so expensive that people are not going anymore. I mean, there are going to be people who go regardless of what the prices are at, but they've priced entire people out of the market for going to their theme parks and on their cruise ships. And they're not producing movies that are seeing good returns at the box office outside of maybe Marvel, but Marvel has been on a decline as well. And they're not doing anything with Star Wars other than stuff on streaming, and that stuff is getting lukewarm to just outright bad reception. I would say there's more hope for the future for Warner Brothers than there is for Disney. Disney is just lost in the weeds, whereas Warner Brothers, they have some things that they can do, but it's a question of what will they commit to making the right decisions in terms of producing more neutral media. Because that's the solution for both of these companies is they need to produce media that doesn't talk down to their audience, that doesn't preach at their audience with DEI, but they need to produce media that can be enjoyed by everybody, and they can because they used to. I've just told you all of the stuff that I've grown up with has been apolitical, largely apolitical. Every once in a while, sure, you get a movie that deals with political subject matter. Okay, that's fair. That's in context. It makes sense. But they aren't pushing real world narratives. You know, and this isn't Disney or Warner Brothers, it's actually Paramount, but a horrible example recently is of Star Trek Picard. They put so many real world political issues and DEI into that show. They changed the entire nature of a legacy and beloved characters, several legacy characters. There was a lot of depression and just bleak outlook at the future. There was a lot of just narcissism and on the part of the writers. It just was a dark and bleak show compared to the bright, optimistic future that was Star Trek. And I'm not even a Star Trek fan, and I feel bad for people who've had to put up with that show in Discovery because tonally, it just absolutely destroys Gene Roddenberry's legacy. And it just goes for just total bleak, just dead future outlooks. And people don't like that. But the writers think that they're smarter than the average viewer. So they put that out there and think, oh yeah, we're so good. It's all about patting themselves in the back. That's why people don't like these award shows like the Oscars or the Grammys, which is music, or uh, what's the one for TV? I'm blanking on it. That's how little I care. Uh, there's the Oscars, the Grammys, and the TV one. I don't know. Don't even care anymore. But it's all a big celebratory backpat. They're all getting each other backpats. General audiences don't matter, and I think we're seeing that more and more. These companies have only lasted 100 years because they've made stuff that the general public enjoys. You know, you can say whether or not you love the Oscars, and the biggest problem with the Oscars has always been celebratory backpats. Stuff that people think deserves those awards, they don't go by that criteria, and they never really have. Folks, Hollywood has always been evil, and I've never been ignorant to that fact. But the reality is that there was a time when they were trying to make movies that they knew general audiences would like. There were directors and producers trying to tell stories that the whole family could enjoy, and now that seems to be less of a focus. And because that's less of a focus, they're seeing less returns. They don't know what they're doing. It's blatantly clear to me that they don't know what they're doing. And I'm sure somebody's going to say, well, they know more than you do. Well, their numbers really aren't showing that they do know what they're doing. It just shows that they're throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And as long as they're including DEI in their philosophy of filmmaking and television making and animating, then they're going to continue to fail. They'll always have an audience, sure, but it's not going to be an audience that gives you a big return on investment. And they're starting to realize this, but they can't abandon DEI because it's so integrated into the Hollywood system at this point. They'd have to completely start over. They'd have to fire multiple people whose entire business philosophy is built on DEI. They'd have to start from almost from scratch. And I wish that they would, especially Disney. Disney needs to start absolutely over because what they've got is a dumpster fire on top of a trash fire on top of a home fire. It's just an absolute mess. There's no salvaging that the way they're going currently. They need to fire a whole bunch of people, and they won't. They will keep people on for one reason or another. So most people like myself are just watching and shaking our heads going, it's more entertaining seeing the drama behind the scenes than it is seeing the actual stuff that they produce. Because the stuff they produce is garbage. You know, and if you like this stuff, I'm not here to dissuade you and say, oh, well, Warner and Disney are terrible because I say so and I don't like them. But there are a contingent of people, myself included, who are absolutely done with these studios. You know, the reason I want to make this video is because I do believe, despite all of this, that their legacy is worth celebrating. You know, Warner Brothers has a great legacy. You know, Disney does have a great legacy, despite where it's at in the current age. They have entertained generations of people who have come and gone. And that is something worth celebrating for sure. You know, Warner Brothers' tagline is celebrating every story. Well, up until now, I think most of their stories have been pretty good. Disney is 100 years of wonder, but nowadays you gotta wonder, what the heck does their future look like? Walt's vision was clear, and I think the struggle was when he died for Roy. Roy was, I think, more of a businessman, less of a creative, so he had to really rely on the people who worked close to Walt to kind of see what it was that he wanted. And I think he struggled with that. Then Eisner came along and kind of shot the company in the arm. And then they started to gain some momentum where they were losing it. Because I think it was by the 80s, and I could be wrong with my dates here, but by the 80s, Disney was really in trouble. And then by the 90s, they had all these original feature films that were putting them back on the map. So one thing that they're going to need to do on the Disney side of things is they're going to need to start producing original animation that's good again. Whether it's 2D, whether it's 3D, I think they would be better off trying 2D. I think it would be more visually appealing, but I think it's a little bit more work, so they might not be willing to spend the time and money. But I think it's worth a gamble if they've got good writers and people who can tell good stories. But right now, they don't have anybody who can tell good stories. Hardly at all. And those people don't get a voice because they're usually not centered around DEI and wokeness. So what solutions do they have on their current path? If they're going to insist on doing things the way that they've been doing them, they're not going to succeed. They're not going to do better. They can reorganize a company as much as they want. If they're going to double and triple down on their philosophies, they're going to fail more and more and more until eventually, 50 years from now, we'll be going, oh, I remember Disney. That was a fun movie studio slash theme park slash cruise ship slash streaming service. They'll be a thing of the past. They won't last for 150th anniversary. Same with Warner Brothers if they insist on something. Again, they haven't made any statements as far as I'm aware. The worst statements that they've made this year is that they're giving DC to one guy under the banner of James Gunn, which I think is a mistake. You take a license as big as DC and you want to make it into this big Marvel competitor who they shouldn't really be trying to compete with, by the way, outside of anything other than comics, and you stagnate the brand because now you're going on one guy's vision, a guy who probably doesn't know these heroes as well as people might be led to think that he does. I know freaking Zack Snyder didn't, which, by the way, I have no respect for Zack Snyder. I mean, I don't respect what he did with those heroes at all. I mean, I know people liked Henry Cavill as Superman, and I think that's the one thing that people praise, and Ben Affleck as Batman was pretty decent, but everything else was just dark and dour and terrible and horribly written. I don't respect him at all. I'm glad they gave him the boot. As far as James Gunn is concerned, he has yet to prove himself, but I'm not confident because, again, throwing these franchises to one person is not smart. These things take teams of creatives to come together who understand the source material and try their best to adapt it instead of trying to screw it over. And I have no confidence that James Gunn is not going to screw over the DC franchise. I have zero confidence in that. Here's hoping I'm wrong, but I have zero confidence. So ultimately, yes, these studios are turning 100. They've been around for a century, and there's a lot to celebrate. But I have no hope for the future. And here's hoping that something happens to shake things up because they both need it. Disney especially. So that's all I got for now. Let me know what you think about these studios turning 100. What's your history with them? What's your outlook of the future? I'd be curious to know down in the comments below. But for now, this has been Super Koopa. I will see you guys in the next video. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.